Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green and you're tuning into AMTV, Alternative Media Television. In today's video, I'm going to discuss why Ukraine is a strategic player in the geopolitical chess game, the new Cold War between the United States and Russia, and why I think it's the catalyst for World War III. In my humble opinion, I think this is how the history books will look at what's happening in the Ukraine today, this destabilization effort that's being led by the United States, and the inevitable response by Russia. We're seeing some of this fallout right now with even protests, some protests picking up in Moscow at this very moment as the Russian economy has been grossly destabilized by the West and by the United States, not just through efforts through the Ukraine, but also global manipulation of our oil markets and our currency markets to destabilize the government of Vladimir Putin. And hopefully, at the very least, from the eyes of the United States and Western leadership, buy a little bit more time, and at best, maybe even potentially overthrow Putin. And believe me, Vladimir Putin is a strong individual. He understands this threat. He understands the seriousness of this altercation, the fact that his economy is largely non-diversified from oil. Over 50% of its revenues, its GDP, actually comes from the oil markets. It's exactly why Obama, who actually went on air, this was reported in some outlets, and pretty much admitted that this is gross manipulation by the U.S. federal government to bring down Russia, to pin our enemies into a corner, not just Russia, but also the BRICS nations and the rising East. All of this, I believe, again, is a flashpoint for World War III. Why is Ukraine such a strategic country? It's a very large country, by the way. It's second in size to Russia in this part of the world. If you compare it to European nations, it's actually larger than France. It also accounts for 80% of all Russian exports of natural gas and oil-related products through its pipelines to the rest of the world. 70% of which goes to Europe and European nations. It's one of the reasons that Europe has a keen interest on these pipelines. Now, Putin, the president of Russia, had struck a deal with the Ukrainian people and actually subsidized things like natural gas due to the fact that he has largely had his Black Sea Fleet, his naval base in the Crimean Peninsula, which has recently been annexed by popular vote, a democratic vote, which you would think the American people and American government would support, has been successfully annexed to Russia. But the larger Ukraine has since been toppled. The previous rightful leadership, friendly to Russia, the Yanukovych government, Viktor Yanukovych, has been toppled. And this has been a huge win for the West. And everybody watching and who understands this geopolitical game knows this, and it's why it's put Putin into a corner. You see, historians have always viewed Ukraine and Russia's pseudo-control of Ukraine as the difference between Russia being a country and an empire as it encroaches further to the West. It's again why the United States has been behind this coup, having even armed, and this is widely known, this has been widely reported on, even widely armed not just the terrorists on the ground that overthrew the rightfully democratically elected leader and government in the name of Viktor Yanukovych's government, but had been arming neo-Nazis on the ground, terrorists with weapons of war that actually, it's come out, had shot on its own people during this very violent revolution. Now, since this period of time, because this area of Sevastopol, which is a port city near the Crimean Peninsula where the Black Sea Fleet is located, because that is so strategic to Vladimir Putin, they had a vote, and the popular vote, over 90% plus of the people voted to annex themselves to Russia, largely Russian speaking and dominant area of this part of the world. So we have this geopolitical chess game playing out right now. And largely we could argue that the destabilization effort that has been launched by the West has been successful up until this point. The ruble having since collapsed, oil prices dropping roughly 45% and growing in less than 6 months. Again, you know, the United States, this actually also hurts the U.S. in the short run as we depend, not just with our shale production, which has taken over largely since 2008, which I find strange in and of itself. I find that a conspiracy, the fact that, you know, oil, we didn't have enough supply, but now we suddenly do post the greatest transfer of wealth, redistribution of wealth, and the largest financial collapse in recent history, largely occurring between the 2008 and 2009 period. This also temporarily hurts U.S. oil production. Again, the United States is also very dependent on the oil trade. And that's where the rub lies with all this, is the petrodollar has largely dominated geopolitics and global trade and global economies for some time now. NATO has dominated. Europe largely in cahoots with the United States, has dominated the global picture. But all of this is changing as our local economies here in the States have been destabilized by super leverage, derivative markets, bailouts, and just the excessiveness that has made up American consumerism, where we've transferred all of our original manufacturing, as was used to be Detroit, overseas to other countries like China that have been buying U.S. treasuries in recent years, but have actually been selling their holdings leading up to this war. Ukraine also is home to very many nuclear reactors, which makes it a powerhouse not just for potentially making nuclear weapons and potentially bringing about a nuclear war, but also has a lot of steel and makes other weapons and ballistic missiles, and also is used in Russia's space program. Again, this is a very strategic part of the world, not just with the Black Sea Fleet and the Russian Navy in the Crimean Peninsula, but also militarily. Because again, with Russian control of the Ukraine, which was the control that they had just some months ago, they are encroaching on the West's supremacy. Again, the BRICS nations are taking over Brazil, Russia, India, and China. They're doing business and trade of oil in their own currencies, and the United States is trying to hold on to the last semblance, its grip of world power. Now Putin's very leadership and government is being threatened, and he will respond accordingly. You know, when you compare Russia's economy, their debt to GDP according to the IMF, you'll actually come to understand that Russia is actually in a fairly strong position long term. They have a debt to GDP ratio of around 15%. Compare that to the United States, according to the IMF findings, of 80%. You'll see just how much stronger of a debt to GDP position Russia is actually in. They have a strong economy. Yes, they need to diversify away from their dependence on oil, like the United States has done, not just dependent on oil, but also selling iPads and also selling other technology. It's also why Russia, Vladimir Putin, and largely the BRICS nations have been making a push for something called the Eurasian Union, which is a counterpoint and would be in direct competition to Europe, the United States, and the European Union. They've been trying to unsuccessfully up until this point. Union, the BRICS nations, and the rising East. It's one of the reasons we're seeing the IMF respond to the economic situation and the economic turmoil in the Ukraine by loaning the Ukraine tens of billions of dollars in new issuance of debt coming from the IMF and the World Bank, so that the West can implicitly control this new puppet government. The IMF and the World Bank have been the world's loan sharks up until this point. It's exactly why Vladimir Putin, Russia, the Eurasian Union, the BRICS nations want to change this. There's a number of ways that Putin can respond to U.S. sanctions, can respond to this attack, this destabilization in the Ukraine, and the destabilization of his own government, some of which he's already implemented. The first thing that the Russian people did, the government did, Putin did, was to lift the subsidies that he had been giving Ukraine over the past several years, a discount on natural gas. This has grossly destabilized the Ukrainian economy and puts a lot of pressure on them economically. And the U.S., through the IMF, the World Bank, and also Russia have been bidding to loan the Ukraine money so that they are dependent on one or the other's governments. Other things that President Vladimir Putin can do, and he has been doing since 2008, is buying lots of gold. In fact, Russia is one of the largest buyers, is made up one of the largest buyers in the world of gold post the 2008-2009 financial crash that started in the United States with the systemic risk that was financial institutions like Lehman Brothers and spread to Europe and the rest of the world. In addition to that, President Vladimir Putin could fight fire with fire and in effect not pay back any outstanding debt that has been loaned out from the IMF and the World Bank and potentially destabilize the entire Eurozone itself. Remember, financial institutions like Lehman Brothers brought down an entire global economy. It started in the United States, spread to the interconnected global financial community, to Europe and the rest of the world. And this could be successfully implemented by Vladimir Putin if he simply decides not to pay back his outstanding debt to the IMF and the World Bank. The destabilization effort of the Ukraine actually might be a successful effort on behalf of the United States if it weren't for the fact that we didn't have such great and challenging structural problems at the very core of our own government and our own financial system here in the USA. If it wasn't for the fact of this excessive leverage, this excessive debt, 18+ trillion dollars, these bailouts, quantitative easing, 0% interest rates, and artificial manipulation that has recently driven the stock market to 18,000, this may in fact be a successful strategy. The U.S. may be able to hurt Russia by driving down oil prices and pinning Vladimir Putin into a corner. But long term, the trajectory of the U.S. economy and our financial system itself, our very government that is tearing apart and ripping apart at the seams, is not sustainable. And it's why I've always suggested over countless videos that I've posted on YouTube, thousands of videos, that we need to address these structural core problems at the heart of the corruption involved in American politics today, with our political leadership, the banking cartel, these very large financial institutions that have duped the American people, that have made trillions of dollars on the upside and then duped them into trillions of dollars worth of bailouts on the downside. All of this redistribution of wealth taking place, by the way, because of this buildup to global conflict and to the war, the next war, World War III, which I very humbly believe Ukraine is a flashpoint too. I'm Christopher Green. You've been tuning into AMTV, alternative media television, hard-hitting and in your face. Get this video out everywhere, share it with your friends and family, and make it viral.